All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I think we'll get started now. So really appreciate everybody jumping on this webinar today. So today we'll be discussing a really exciting topic around how to build AI agents that you can trust. We have wonderful guests on this panel today. I'll be your host. My name's Jason. I'm one of the co-founders at SuperAnnotate, and I'll let folks introduce themselves. So Karthik, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm Karthik Srinivasan. I'm a research scientist here in the Mosaic research team at Databricks. I've been here since last January, so I think closing in on about 2 years. Before that, did my PhD in Wisconsin, Madison. Worked on a bunch of things from optimization to contested learning to LLMs, which brings us here, where I'm currently focusing on knowledge assistant, which is our question answering agent, and we have been working actually on how you can make it better, steer it, so you can trust it to give you the right answers and the answers that you like.
It's great. Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Karthik. Julia.
Amazing. Thank you, Jason. Julia McDonald here, Vice President of LM Operations. I lead the Gen AI data department at SuperAnnotate, where we provide post-training eval data to foundational model companies, labs, and enterprise companies training agents.
Great. Okay, Felipe.
Hi, everyone. Felipe. I work for NVIDIA. I'm a senior research scientist. I've been with NVIDIA for about 3 years and a half now. So started just before the whole ChatGPT revolution, I would say. My background originally was in machine translation, and turns out that is like pretty much very transferable to large language models. And I focus mostly on the post-training part, alignment, reasoning, rather than like pre-training. So very excited to be here with you guys.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks, Felipe. And so just as a some note taking or a couple of intro notes. This will be kind of just like a fireside chat with folks. Did want to say that the guests on the panel are here representing themselves, not necessarily representing their companies. So all their opinions are really their personal opinions and not necessarily opinions that are shared by their wider org. So just some housekeeping there. And then a little bit about SuperAnnotate. Julia talked about this a little bit, but really our goal is, how do we help companies bring human intelligence to artificial intelligence to help create and productionalize AI, whether you're a foundation model company, a frontier model builder, or an enterprise that's trying to deploy AI. We provide services, human in the loop services, human data services, as well as an end-to-end kind of human data orchestration platform that helps folks do this. So great, let's jump in. Of course, the topic of this chat is about agents, right? And so the number one buzzword in AI today is agents. Everybody's talking about agents. Every podcast, every webinar like ours, every ad you see is all about agents. But everyone has kind of like a different definition of agents. So Karthik, how do you think about agents? What are agents in your mind?
So you hit the nail on the head right there, which is that everyone has their own definition of what an agent is, and ideally stole this definition of mine from one of my good friends and colleagues, Prithviraj Amanbrolu, who's a professor over at UCSD. He works in reinforcement learning and control, and like he's been thinking about agents for a long time, typically from like the robotics perspective. And what he says when you ask him what is an agent is he says it is whatever you want it to be. And I cannot agree with him more. As you said, and as we've seen, agents can vary from a small wrapper around an LLM to like do something like you book a flight, to something really, really complicated like Claude Code, which like I don't know, like goes and runs a bunch of code, figures out what you need to do, breaks it down into tasks, writes the code, tests the code. So all of these are still agents. So I really view it as a term that's useful as an abstraction. So whether something is an agent, whether something is a tool, whether something is a light wrapper or an LLM, I think it's meaningful as long as you can encapsulate its purpose, how it's useful to you, what goes in, what comes out. But beyond that, I think it really is whatever you want it to be.
I think that's a very good definition. But I think, in my opinion, people have been using the term for anything that you will call from outside your monolithic large language model, and then is that a calculator or is that like a stochastic optimizer that will run for like 5 hours or whatever that you're going to use to augment the abilities of your LLM. And I think people are super indexing on that, and as that it can be anything.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, and I think so. Folks, I mean, obviously, you heard it from two experts in the field. The definition is loose, right? So, and I think that's a theme that we've all seen, and that we'll see more of over the course of the next couple of years in AI. So when you think about, I think that there are definitely still some key distinctions. We talk about a certain level of complexity. Felipe, you talked about being able to call outside sort of your monolithic, internal systems. Felipe, when you think about some of the challenges around kind of building an agent and getting it to perform well versus things that you might consider to be non-agentic systems or LLMs, walk us through that. What are those challenges? What do you see as sort of the differences? How should enterprises and companies think about them?
In my perspective, looking more on the enterprise use case, which is sometimes a little different from like builders of like large models that are usually generic. For me, an agent for an enterprise should be let's say a program that will solve a specific task, or that will, in conjunction with other agents, with other tools, solve a specific task. So something that will be like extremely vague or extremely like capable of so many different things, in the end, it will be like very hard to implement. So I would see several like small agents solving very specific tasks, and that's the way that I imagine enterprises are going to deploy those, more on the very specific niche application with measurable return and measurable goals. So for me, that is what I think it's pretty strategic.
I agree, Felipe. I wanted to sort of also think, everyone is talking about this MIT study that came out and said like, okay, 95% of enterprise use cases don't lead to any meaningful ROI. And obviously everyone has like, these challenges are real. So I feel like there's two things that are contributing in addition to what Felipe said. One is a lot of the agentic use cases that enterprises pick rely on good enterprise data because they're obviously from within enterprise, they're very niche. And I don't think a lot of enterprises are ready to have their data be ingested by an agent, right? They're missing context, they're missing labeling, they're missing metadata, they're not doing RAG properly, they're not doing sort of chunking properly. So you have a lot of data and it's not getting ingested, so no bottom line. And then I think the second challenge that we also see with use cases is that a lot of enterprises think very linearly into, okay, customer success chatbot, cool. You know, and then there's not much adaptation in terms of the UI or the use case to a specific enterprise. So then if that use case is not, the use case that everyone's talking about is not a good fit, then again, we have this like 95% of fail rates where the other 5% though see sort of disproportionate results.
Yeah, I want to just double down on what both Felipe and Julia said. That's sort of what I've been seeing and we've been seeing as well. That most customers, most enterprises, really their moat is their data. They have something very, very specific that they want to do, and their data indicates that. And sure, one alternative is to train your own model on this data, but really, when the models are good enough, you can build a system that somehow leverages data and then answers your questions or does what you want, like solves your task using that. And inevitably, one alternative is to like build your own bespoke RAG pipeline and have like this whole workflow, agentic workflow that does your task. And what we've been trying to do is like with Knowledge Assistant and Agent Bricks is sort of make this a little bit more general, where like you can point it to your data, and now you have your own agent that knows your data that can perform your task. But again, this relies on your task being well specified. And what we're trying to do, and I think what Felipe said, and what I think people will continue trying to do, is try to refine that task specification, where you can sort of be very precise in telling the agent what your goals are, what your inputs, outputs are. And hopefully we hit a point where we don't have to specify too much, and it can figure this out from the data, because it's sort of there underneath a lot of muck that you can usually pull out and figure it out.
Yeah, no, all good points. Before we did want to say, folks, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We'll have some time at the end, and folks, and we'll be able to answer some of those questions at the end of the chat today. But feel free to do that. On this topic, I want to kind of double down on what everyone said. I think there are kind of three things here that we really think about a lot at SuperAnnotate, and we think they're really important to success. And it's good to hear them kind of echoed amongst the other folks here. Is that, number one, how do you define that task, right? How do you define the thing that the agent is trying to solve? You have to be really clear and specific about that today. Otherwise, the chances of success diminish considerably, because you're tuning that system to be able to perform that specific task. That's one. The other is leveraging your internal data. We also believe that your internal data as an enterprise is your moat. It is the way that you are going to be able to have a competitive advantage against the other folks in your space. And how do you properly leverage that into your AI systems? And it doesn't necessarily mean build a new model from scratch, but there are other ways to do it, so you can leverage that data. And then the last is being measurable, right? You see that folks are not measurable. They're just like, you ask folks, hey, how are you thinking about evaluating the performance of the system? And people like deer in the headlights have no idea and they haven't even thought about it yet. And says, well, we're going to just incorporate this judge, and then the judge is going to determine. Or, well, how are you going to evaluate the judge? Oh, and then the deer in the headlights again, right? And so you start thinking about how do you kind of navigate these systems properly, and how do you incorporate all of these three topics? So really awesome. Thanks. And thanks everyone for the thoughts there. On the topic of judges, right? There's this the trend has, continue to see this push into synthetic data? How do you leverage synthetic data? How does that compare to the need for human data? You know, when do you need to use one versus the other? Karthik, maybe you can kind of shed some light on how you think about the two and when to use one versus the other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm probably gonna hand off this question to the others too, because this one's a hard one. It's one that I've been thinking about for a while. I know a lot of people have been thinking about it, and it's one that my opinions have been changing, sort of like flip-flopping a little bit. So I'll try to get into that. But before I wanted to say the note you mentioned about evals, 100% agreed. I think when I came out of grad school and started working on real world problems with LLMs, I initially was hoping that there's some magical insight here that like all the big companies, all the big labs have figured out that somehow we don't know. Because when I look at the transformer architecture and I see there's no magical insight there. There's the optimization's hard. Sure, you have normalization, you have all these like cool things, but largely like it's sequence to sequence modeling, right? What's more, and I thought that there isn't, so far at least, my opinion is that there isn't much more. I think really it boils down to data and evals. You get task specification, right? That defines a solid eval. And please, for anyone who's working on anything, Gen AI, agentic, even machine learning, get an eval in place. That's going to define what you're really trying to maximize. And once you have that, you really go and work on your data. And first eval data, and then training data. And so speaking of data, like you said, there's human data versus synthetic data, and there was a long period where we always said like human data is the gold standard data, right? But then when you look at human data, you start realizing that humans, which we know are fallible, make mistakes. So human data has errors too. The thing that catches it is that typically when people mention human data, you talk about like multiple rounds of quality control and like verification and checking. And that is really what bumps up the quality. If you just scrape the web, you're not going to get very high quality data. You're going to find like if you just scrape the web for all arithmetic expressions, you're going to find a bunch of them which are wrong. Then you're possibly going to teach your model how to do math incorrectly. So an application like this, possibly like synthetic data, would work better. And I think how I've started thinking about it is models have gotten really, really good at doing very precise things, right? So unless you pick some task which is extraordinarily niche, which no model has ever had to do, and you don't have enough material to teach it how to do that task, like let's say there is a new subfield of physics that got created a couple of weeks ago, right? There isn't yet enough literature on the area that I could pipe into a large language model to teach it how to do this. So for it to generate synthetic data, defining this field would be very, very hard. So this is a place where I need to go find specialists. I need to find people who know this field because there are very few. And this is a place where possibly human data could be extremely useful. On the other hand, tasks like arithmetic, if I told a model I want to generate arithmetic with these bounds, and I give it access to, let's say, a calculator or something that I know can do arithmetic well, and I also tell it I want you to like screw up in these ways so that I know to handle mistakes. I want you to try all these different formats. These are all things that if you define well enough, the model can do. And then if you put in the effort to curate this data, to like go through it carefully, make sure there aren't errors, right? Like the same way a human would, you would check their work. So you should check the LLM's work too. And I think in an application like this, synthetic data would work. So the sort of litmus test I have developed so far, and Felipe and Julia, I want to hear your opinions on this, is if you know your task very precisely. You can define it perfectly. You have a way to check the result. And it is not a task that is so niche that an LLM has heard about it, then I think you should use synthetic data. Now, if it's a niche task that hasn't had much exposure, you need to go find the right specialist. And similarly, if it's a task that may not be niche, but is ambiguous, you don't have a good way to verify it. You sort of have to like get the human intuition on it. You haven't defined it well enough yet, then I think that is not yet a place where you can use synthetic data. Because if you can't define the task well enough, sure as hell the LLM is not going to be able to figure out how to do it. So that's my 2 cents on it.
I think I have a very similar but slightly dissimilar in some ways. For me, usually when I draw the line, it's not a very precise line either, but do I know the domain? Is the domain already in my pre-training data? If not, yes, I'll develop like pages and pages of a prompt, and I'll try to see like if that is going to give me something. And then like you still need humans in the loop to like reflect, does this make sense? Or we probably will need like a bunch of like seed examples, and then LMs are really good in like seeing and repeating a behavior. So then you can get more and more and more data. And the other thing that LLMs and like any model is usually good is into signal to noise ratio in synthetic data is so much better than in human data, because humans will not only mistakes, but just like differences in judgment. So your model will converge faster usually with synthetic data, but it doesn't mean that you don't need human data, because it will only know to do like be around the average of what the model is expecting. So and like going back to a little bit enterprise cases, like no model has seen enterprise's internal data. So you will need, and usually the human in the loop, and will have to be someone from inside, in my view, someone from inside the company partnered with an external vendor or someone that will learn what they're doing and then will learn how to label based on that like company's need, until we reach a certain point that things will naturally evolve and we'll get more data for free. But I think those are my main 2 things. Like I just said, like defining the problem, defining the search space for your data, and if you have never seen any data of that sort, you will need seed data and be able to verify. So trust but verify.
100%. And I think I want to just like go back to something Felipe just said, which was the human in the loop aspect, which is, and I think I left it out a little bit in that I think human in the loop is like is a sliding scale. So like you have the 100% version, which is real data, where like the human just labels the data themselves, right? And then you have like, okay, the human's checking the responses, and you have the human checks every 5 responses, every 10 responses, maybe does like a gut check, right? So I think for most of the data applications, I think people imagine them to be like a largely human-free system, where it's like you write the prompt, let it run, and like, oh, you have billions of tokens. But I have never seen that happen. In any case where you use the data well, there is a lot of human work. So like Felipe said, there's curation, where like you're prompting and trying and seeing if things work. And then even once you have things that work, you need to look at your data. Just peek at it every now and then, see what's going on, because again, like you said, signal to noise is going to be like really, really good because it is doing what you asked it to do, but it is only doing what you asked it to do. And very often you'd see that like if you scale that up, you're going to be like, no, I needed more variance in this. Like otherwise, like my model is going to become like very unimodal in some sense.
I agree. Actually, Karthik, I wanted to essentially cover the same sort of angle of what is curation, right? Because we see a lot of times, I feel people imagine that, synthetic data is like you press one big button of GPU deploy and you get perfect synthetic data and then you live happy, and like, why do you need humans in the loop? And I like to sort of look into the examples of what the frontier labs use as synthetic data and just kind of walk through where are the humans there. So like training agentic capabilities, right? So people kind of simulate tools that have all this specific kind of MCP protocol compliance. They are doing all these different things. Then people simulate agents that have access to different tools. They have different autonomy layers. They have different system prompts. Each of these obviously being generated and then in batches curated, and then simulating users with different intents that want different tools, and then simulating the entire interaction. Once you start looking into, okay, how much human curation and oversight do I need in addition to seeding everything, every little, not just like, here is a system prompt for agents, but like, here's a system prompt for a very autonomous agent in a healthcare industry, which has this particular goal. And then you're seeding all this, different use cases. When you scale that up, you realize how much expert support and handholding of that synthetic data needs to be done. In addition, obviously, to what both of you covered, which is if the models have never seen it, then you're not just seeding, you're basically doing human first and LLM assist.
Great, thanks, Julia. There were a couple questions that tie into this topic, but I want to start with one around evaling within a specific domain. So maybe Felipe, you can take the first pass of this. When RAG is used to generate the responses, what's an approach you recommend to create a good test set? Because even with human evaluation, each question can have multiple correct responses or more.
Yeah, I think this is anyone that started working with internal knowledge bases from companies already, like, okay, it could be, this response could be right, but also this one. My way of usually approaching this is a question will have one key specific thing that the user is looking. Let's say, like, let's call it key information, and that is what I would put in my evaluation stat. Like, oh, this is the question. The answer has to have at least this one, and desirable additional things would be some other ones, and anything that is not backed up by that chunk that was retrieved should be treated as like that. This is another ill-defined term, hallucination. So anything that is there and it should not be there, that should, in my view, sort of like fail the question, fail the test already. So first, define what is the key information that's being searched for. Are there like desirable secondary information? And then it will become a way easier for like humans to just look, oh, this has the key information and has one or two additional information, and they can both be right. One can be better than the other, but they can both be right. So this is the way that I usually do.
This is a fantastic question, and I'd love to jump in on this because this is something that I've actually been thinking about for a while now, because it's sort of exactly the question we were trying to figure out when we were saying, like, oh, we want to build this knowledge assistant thing, which does exactly that, right? It does RAG, answers questions based on a knowledge base. How do you evaluate this, right? And we actually found this use case, which is, or this failure mode in some sense. So it's like you had the eval set that you mentioned. You have a reference answer, which is written by an expert. This is the perfect answer. And now the LLM answered without seeing the reference answer. And sometimes it matches, and you have an LLM-as-Judge, like some system that compares the answers and says, yeah, you you have the right things in here. And sometimes it would say, no, I have a different answer. But when I look at it and we would manually inspect these answers, we'd find, no, this answer is right too, right? Like, and really this puts a lot of, let's say, pressure on giving the right reference answer, because you're defining many things when you define the right reference answer. Like Felipe said, you're defining the sort of like the key ingredients that need to be there for sure. But if you're not careful, you're also defining like the sort of scope of the only things that need to be there, right? Like, because what if you added something which now with context makes this incorrect? What if you added an incorrect thing? So you've had the right thing, but you've also added something else. And more importantly, you have like with enterprise applications, you have these secondary features that you care about. You care about the tone, right? Like you don't want ChatGPT to like be constantly rapping answers to you or like being rude, right? You want it to speak in a very specific way. And even something like hallucinations, which I agree with Felipe again, terrible definitions all across the board. But there are tolerances to it. If you care about creative writing, you want some of it. You're let's say in like a medical domain, you want none of it. You want to be very precise. So all these things are really sliding scales, and I think we've hit a point where for most applications, specifically ones which have bespoke knowledge bases, your verifier, because it has to deal with the ambiguities of natural language, it's probably going to be an LLM as a judge. Now, how you define LLM-as-a-Judge, that's tricky. And I want to do some like shameless marketing here, and I just say like we released a blog about enhancing LLM-as-Judge with the idea of grading notes a little while ago, and I think that has some of the insights that we got from there. And one of the key ones basically was saying reference answers are very good, but you have to like work really hard and like make sure that you define them correctly, like Felipe said. Another way in which you can, it all boils down to task specification, right? Like a correctness specification or goodness specification. So another mechanism you can do this is like with guidelines, where you say like, these are the things that I want from your answer. I want you to be this concise. I want you to be grounded for sure in these documents. I want the tone to be friendly, like and you have all these different metrics, and you ideally want your system to then take your questions, responses. If you have a reference answer, wonderful, and then give you like this breakdown of saying like, okay, if you don't have these things, like Felipe said, this is an incorrect answer, pass fail, right? And then you have a bunch of these like other things like sort of nice to haves and like better, worse, and honestly, I have this argument with my colleagues. We've been having it for months now about whether judges should be pass fail or whether they should be scores. I have been fighting for the score side of things,
Pass
but
fail here.
there we go. I this I can argue for both. Is what I've found. But there's like with everything, I think there's a lot of ambiguity here. But the goal really should be to try to define very precisely what you're looking for, and that might be one thing, but it will more likely be several things, and you might end up with 5 LLM-as-judges, or like in MLflow world, we call them as metrics, like custom metrics. You define all of these different things, and hopefully you then get like a holistic view of your system. But yeah, reference, the one thing I'd add is reference answers can be a dangerous thing. Like I have found that if you over-index on reference answers, your system might start tending to behaviors that you did not intend. So, for example, like we had an application where our reference answers were very, very verbose and very like thorough. So if you asked it how to perform a certain task, it would give you every single way you could have done that task. Now, all of a sudden, your system is going to get penalized if it produces only one way of doing that task, which is what you want many times. Like when I ask an agent how to do something, I don't want how to do it in like 17 different languages. I just want to know how to do it in Python, right? And I don't want it to get penalized for that. So say like, I almost feel like the appropriate phrase here is like sort of like be careful what you wish for, and like with reference answers, you define what you wish for very precisely.
I think, Karthik, one challenge that we also see with those reference answers, right? If the RAG system is kind of an evergreen database that constantly gets updated, now you have this challenge that the reference answers are old, and you just like increase the workload so much, and it's often ultimately nobody maintains it because the researchers moved on, and now things start breaking down. It's ideally, you know, you have a RAG that doesn't rely on it, but that's also the very challenging situation, how to get there.
No, that's exactly right. In fact, we've started thinking about this in terms of cost. So like maintaining an eval set, which is good, defines all the things that you want with the right reference answers, with a changing knowledge base, is expensive. And expensive in terms of people hours, right? As human curation. And we want to come up with ways in which customers, users have to invest less cost and get that same behavior. And so like guidelines are a good approach, grading notes are a good approach. But really the thing that we've been thinking about a lot of late is just steerability of these judges. How can I move these judges to face the right direction, to sort of capture what the customer is looking for from an answer. And one of the things that we've been thinking about a lot is feedback. Like can the customer just look at a judgment of the response, provide some feedback saying, I didn't like this part, you were too harsh on this, you were too light on this, can you adapt based on that? And that might be, I think, like an interesting way to go forward and make it easier to create the sort of right judge.
Thanks. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about evals, right? So obviously this segued really nicely into the concept of evals and how folks are thinking about it. One topic that we hear a lot about, and we hear about it in sort of different terms, is the concept of either an eval lifecycle or this concept of the flywheel, right? The eval flywheel. I'd love to hear folks' thoughts on what are key components in this flywheel that folks need. Maybe start with Julia on this. But yeah, understanding how people can think about, you know, the life cycle of an agentic system, and from an eval perspective.
I think this is a huge topic that is not necessarily something that people have been thinking about the last 6 months, but it's going to become a major bottleneck in production. I think a lot of enterprise companies are planning to go in production like next 6 to 12 months. And that's essentially why we developed this also eval framework, which reflects the life cycle, Jason. So I think that emphasize how important this is. In many cases, enterprises essentially do an eval in training, and then they're like, okay, I'm done, right? I'm done. Now I'm going in production. And then a bunch of things happen. You know, best case scenario, the legal department, marketing department starts jumping in, saying, hold on a second, what do you mean? Worst case scenario, you have a chatbot out there doing something that it's not supposed to, and then you find that out in the news. And so to address all of those concerns, we've developed the eval lifecycle framework, which basically says we will set up an eval in training and have it run in production through all the model updates in such a way that increases automation over time while kind of keeping the eval quality. So the way we obviously do it is every kind of new release of very first time something gets released it's very human heavy because you want to have the minimum eval, you want to have a bigger prompt sets. And then gradually release data gets to train the judges. And then ultimately you come to a point where almost everything can be taken by judges. So there's kind of three components to this. There's the judges, there's the humans in the loop, then there is the programmatic checks and verifiers of things like, did the tools get called correctly? Did the data get retrieved correctly? So our eval lifecycle framework that at SuperAnnotate, at least it combines all of those in such a way that in production, humans are only in the loop where it's either some sort of a failure or an edge case, right? There's certain words, I don't know, suicide that trigger immediately humans in the loop, or there's disagreement by the judges. But the quality of the eval is continuing, and people do not have to worry about alignment drift or environmental changes or I don't know, sycophancy, all those interesting things that we otherwise see happens without the framework.
Great. I think we're getting Felipe, did you want to jump in, and then I know we're getting close to time, so we'll do the last question after that.
Yeah, I'll be very quick about this, especially because what you mentioned, like flywheel, this is another very poorly defined term, which should not be. But coming from like a mechanical industry engineering background, I have like my viewing like always like physical things, and for me, all of that flywheel and all of what Julia mentioned, you'll do once, all by hand probably, and then you'll start to see, oh, here is like where I can maximize like my ROI by like, oh, this is easy to automate and takes a lot of time, so I'll automate this part. And then you keep doing this in a systematic way. It's not something that you are going to do once. It's like a systematic process, and having that operationalized is not an easy task. But we've seen like in industry like PDCA and all of the things that are known in manufacturing, they can also be a good starting point for those.
Great. Awesome. And so, okay, so there are a few questions. We will, all of the folks that have asked questions, we'll try to get you an answer via email because I do know we're coming at that time. I did want to give everyone the opportunity to answer one last question that we had set up. And Felipe, we'll start with you since you just finished chatting about evals. What are the one or two key trends over the next 6 months that you see taking place in the agent space?
Yeah, for me, and I'm very biased towards this, but LLMs have drifted towards exploration and integrating search and when to search and which search methods to use. That is where I think a lot of return will be, because we cannot keep training LLMs every 2 months to incorporate the newest data. And if we try that, we might fail because like it's just like a few examples. So being able to find both factual items, but also like, oh, I need to do reduction, dimensionality reduction, and then the LLM finds a snippet and then routes that to a Python, like a Jupyter notebook, and then runs that and then find, oh, but how do I check if this is correct? And all of this sort of like routing will always go back to search to for me to like find what is the one of the best ways to do it. So I think search enabled LLMs, I think they are going to be the thing going forward for at least like the next 6 months.
Super interesting, actually. I'm very excited to hear also, Karthik. I think for me, maybe 3 things actually. One, I hope and I think we will see a lot more kind of proactive agents. So we see already OpenAI moving into this like reminders, but that's just basically scratching the surface, right? We will see sort of passive agents, hopefully, that come up with like, oh, here's an insight based on everything you're doing, your workflow. I've been like monitoring you, tracking you, whatever. I think that goes hand in hand also with longer term horizon agents. I mean, we see Claude Code is kind of trying to go into this 8-hour span. I don't know if that's actually working. I'm not sure, but I think we will actually have agents that can go and you can deploy them overnight, and like in the morning they have whatever done. So that's really great. And then last, I feel like we'll see many more different UI constellations. Like we're kind of still stuck in this chatbot modality, even with code. So hopefully we'll see more voice and hardware devices and then all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah, so I think my answer is fairly aligned with Felipe's and Julia's. I'm obviously biased by what I've been seeing and what I've been working on, but I think for me the sort of key places that we see impact is sort of in feedback and memory, and what I mean by that is we discussed how challenging it is to define the task for an agent and to define if it's doing it correctly, the evaluation. We want to make this easier and easier. And I think feedback is a very natural way to interact with the system. Like this is how human beings learn, right? Or you tell it, no, that was wrong, this was right, and you try to figure out what went wrong. And I don't mean that necessarily as model weight updates. The agent should just be able to look at that and make sufficient changes in prompt or